werden heute Abend über Online-Culture Wars diskutieren. Was sollen wir tun gegen reaktionäre Rollbacks? Zunächst wollen wir auf dem Podium ein Gespräch führen, oder wir versuchen ein Gespräch auf dem Podium zu führen. Und danach wollen wir aber auch probieren, mit euch zusammen in die Diskussion zu kommen. Der Abend ist vorbereitet worden und wird unterstützt oder vorbereitet worden, vor allem in der Hand der Hellen Panke. Das ist die Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung Berlin, die begrüßt euch ganz doll. Unterstützt worden ist der Abend vom Nautilus Verlag. Katharina sitzt auch irgendwo schwanger hier in den Reihen. Sie hängt Katharina von der Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung hat hinten mit den Händen hochgewedelt, hat auch mit unterstützt. Und Katharina vom Nautilus Verlag sitzt irgendwo auch in den Reihen und hat die Veranstaltung mit vorbereitet. Das Messi-Magazin ist mit in der Vorbereitung und wir bedanken uns zusätzlich beim kleinen Buchladen B-Books, der im Frangelkiez arbeitet und da sitzt, der den kleinen Buchladen oder den kleinen Buchtisch macht. Wer sich interessiert für das Programm von allen Beteiligten, die ich jetzt gerade eben nennen musste und gern auch gemacht habe, kann sich hinten einschreiben in die Liste. Da kriegt man dann so Newsletter und wird zugeballert mit möglichen Veranstaltungstipps. Das allerletzte Dankeschön geht ans SO36, weil es immer geil ist, hier zu sein und eine schöne Diskussion und abends stattfindet. Wir haben uns heute Abend, wir wissen noch nicht genau, wie gut es funktioniert, aber wir freuen uns ganz doll auf eine Diskussion, die, glaube ich, vor allem kurz vor den Wahlen hier, unabhängig von den Wahlen, ein bisschen wichtig ist für die Linke in Deutschland. Wir haben uns eingeladen, neben mir sitzt Nagle aus Dublin. Sie arbeitet als Journalistin und Wissenschaftlerin. Sie schreibt unter anderem für das linke Online-Magazin The Buffalo, linke kulturpolitische Zeitschriften wie Current Affairs oder Jacobin, aber auch für die Irish Times. Seit Jahren liest und analysiert und schreibt sie über rechte Internetportale wie 4chan und deren Strategien der zunehmenden Enttabuisierung rassistischer, misogyner, also frauenfeindlicher, schwulenfeindlicher und antisemitischer Äußerungen. Eskalation in Foren und die Selbstvergewisserung über eine verstetigte Politik, also eine Politik, die sozusagen andauert, der Provokation, der All-Rights und der All-Lights, das wird sie selber gleich noch erklären, was vielleicht der Unterschied ist, wie Milo Yiannopoulos, haben ihren Beitrag geleistet für Donald Trumps Wahlsieg im November 2016. Für Furore sorgt gerade ihr Buch, in dem sie das alles analysiert, das heißt Kill All Normies, Online Culture Wars from 4chan and Tumblr to Trump and the All-Right, gibt es auch noch hinten am Büchertisch. Es gibt es bislang nur auf Englisch, aber wer Lust hat, da reinzuschauen, kann das sich besorgen. Die zweite Person, die wir heute Abend eingeladen haben, ist Laurie. Die sitzt ganz außen und streckt auch die Hand hoch. Die ist vermutlich relativ vielen Menschen hier im Raum bekannt. Sie arbeitet als feministische Bloggerin, Schriftstellerin und linke Politaktivistin in London. Sie schreibt für große bürgerliche Zeitschriften wie den Guardian oder New York Times, aber auch für Online-Magazine, linke Online-Magazine wie The Buffalo. Inzwischen sind 4 Bücher schon von ihr auf Deutsch erschienen. Allesamt sind beim Nautilus Verlag und unter der lieben Hand von Katharina übersetzt worden oder betreut worden. Als letztes vor wenigen Tagen der Sammelband Bitch Doctrine. Das Buch versammelt auch viele Essays und Abhandlungen zu Trump und zu den All-Rights, aber auch Ausführungen zur Verteidigung einer linken Identitätspolitik oder die Schwierigkeiten damit und zu der linken Utopie. Auch darauf werden wir im Laufe des Abends zu sprechen kommen. Büchlein gibt es ebenfalls hinten am Büchertisch. Laurie bleibt auch noch ein bisschen hier, wenn sie noch Nerven hat und signiert. Die letzte Person, die wir uns heute eingeladen haben, wird wie ich auch und wie Fabian, der zweite Moderator, den ich ganz vergessen habe, auf Deutsch referieren. Das ist Felix. Felix Klopotek kommt aus Köln und arbeitet ebenfalls als Wissenschaftler und Journalist. Er schreibt eigentlich viel zur Arbeiterbewegung und zu Dissidenten der Arbeiterbewegung und gleichzeitig beschäftigt sich aber seit Jahren, vor allem als Autor der linken Zeitschrift Konkret, mit der Bewegung der neuen Rechten, der AfD, der Alternative für Deutschland, und ihr Verhältnis zum Rechtspopulismus zu Pegida und anderen Konsorten. Wir freuen uns also riesig. Irgendein neues Buch hast du auch rausgegeben, Felix, das gibt es hinten auch, habe ich gesehen. Aber da geht es nicht um die neuen Rechten, sondern um Selbstvergewisserung von Optimierung. Selbstoptimierung klingt auch scheiße. Wir freuen uns riesig, dass wir euch 3 zusammenbringen konnten. Habt ganz riesen Dank, dass ihr den Weg auf euch genommen habt, vor allem heute Abend nach Berlin zu kommen. Laurie pulsiert hier schon eine ganze Weile in Berlin und du mischst das Literaturfestival auf. Aber Felix und Angela sind tatsächlich nur für heute hergekommen. Deswegen freue ich mich, dass wir den Abend irgendwie zusammen moderieren werden und hoffentlich relativ viel politischen, brisante Diskussionen oder Fragen aufstellen, wie wir mit dem Online-Culture Wars und der neuen Rechten umgehen.
Ja, ich will gleich mit der ersten Frage anfangen. Und zwar, in Deutschland rieb sich so die interessierte politische Öffentlichkeit verwundert die Augen, dass erst Trump das Rennen in der Republikanischen Partei gemacht hat und dann noch gegen Hillary Clinton. Als Grund für diese falsche Annahme, mit der in den Medien hier mit vollster Überzeugung vertreten wurde, Trump wird das niemals wird er Präsident der USA, wird oft dann später genannt, dass die Linke oder Journalisten und Journalistinnen des Mainstreams in einer sogenannten Filterbubble leben würden. Das heißt, dass sie nicht mitbekommen hätten, wie sich Teile der Bevölkerung im Internet radikalisieren und aus den herrschenden medialen Diskursen rausfallen. Jetzt nun an mein ganzes Podium die Frage, oder an unser ganzes Podium die Frage: Kann man wirklich gesellschaftliche Stimmung nach rechts mit Memes und Blogbeiträgen radikalisieren oder gar schaffen? Und wählen Menschen wirklich Trump oder in 2 Wochen in Deutschland vielleicht die AfD, weil ihre Facebook- und Twitter-Freunde entsprechende Memes und Blogbeiträge teilen? Also die Frage, wie stark ist das Internet als Beeinflussungsmaschine wirklich? Ich würde sagen, Laurie fängt an.
Thank you. Oh God, sorry. I guess first, I'd like to say thank you to Helle Panke for having me here and to Esso Sexton-Dreisig, but also to, can I just say thank you to Max and Felix for doing the translation, because it's a really hard job and they should get a clap. Is that, yeah, clap. Thanks. So the question is it possible to radicalize people on the internet? Well, clearly it is possible. But we often, and this is not just the case with the election of Donald Trump or a Brexit. We often talk about the internet as if it has some kind of moral affect, as if the internet itself is a kind of living thing with ideas and an agenda, whereas the internet is just a medium, and we can confuse medium for message. It's a statistic that really surprised me when I found it out about 6 months ago was that 14% of the population of the United States is either actually illiterate or functionally illiterate. And these are not people who are, engaging deeply with online memes and getting into Facebook wars. These are people who get most of their news from talk radio and from the television. I think I think we possibly both over and underestimate the effect of quote-unquote online culture wars. It's not just about, I think we can, obviously this is not the point of the conversation we're having here, but we have to focus as well on the underlying social conditions that create the possibility of radicalization. You can't just radicalize people out of nowhere. There have to be existing preconditions, and in the United States, the existing precondition was centuries of racism. A really important essay in The Atlantic just came out called Donald Trump is the First White President, which takes apart piece by piece the arguments against the influence of racism on the outcome of that election. People have argued that without, and some of the numbers reflect, I think, that if you discounted all non-white voters, all voters of color, then Donald Trump would have won every single state. Donald Trump won whites in every single social category. He won white women, he won white men, he won white people in college-educated social categories and people without high school diplomas. He won white people in New York and in the southern states. And I think it is I think blaming the internet for this just doesn't do. This is about racism, and the internet is a tool for building an architecture of radical white supremacist politics, but the internet isn't necessarily the problem here, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess the first thing that came to mind was that, when we're talking about the online world and radicalizing people, most of the people in this room probably want to radicalize people. But obviously with a different political aim in mind. But, and most of the people in this room probably think that the online world and the world of media is an effective way to radicalize people, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be writing. So we know that it does have some influence. But if we're looking at, why did Donald Trump get elected or something like that, I mean, my book is about the online culture wars, so obviously that's what I'm focusing on. But I would not say, that the internet had this huge role in the election of Donald Trump at all. It's more that it had a role in a section of society that is normally not attracted to the politics of the right, that would normally find the right kind of stuffy and conservative. Young people who wanted to be sort of irreverent and stuff like that were suddenly attracted to, the Republican candidate, where they wouldn't have been before. So if the internet had an influence, I think that is really the main thing. They did kind of the impossible by making the center-right kind of cool among young people. But in terms of the general support for Trump, I would say, isn't it also rooted in sort of material conditions? Like, this was after 2 terms of Obama, and what Hillary Clinton was putting forward was essentially more of the same in economic terms. We see that the American economy, like a lot of places, my own country as well, is in this kind of terminal decline that seems to be unstoppable. So why would anyone vote for more of the same? There was no major break from that in that platform. If you go back and look at what Donald Trump was saying when he was getting elected, yes, there was the build the wall stuff, but most of what he talked about was trade. I watched all of his rallies, and he talked about trade all the time. He always said, we're going to rip up these international trade deals. We're going to, radically overhaul our infrastructure, and he almost sounded sort of Keynesian sometimes in the way that he talked about infrastructure. Obviously, that's not actually going to happen, but that was what he was saying. And he was talking about protectionism, which would be a total radical change from globalization, which had been the norm in American foreign policy or economic policy. So all of those things kind of suggest that, maybe people thought, everything is getting worse. None of the experts seem to know how to change this. And this guy is saying, we're going to, just throw a grenade into it and see what happens. And, I don't think it's that hard to see why people would find that convincing.
Yes. But on the other hand, if this was if economic concerns were the overwhelming reason for people to vote for Donald Trump, you would have anticipated not just the white working class, quote unquote, but also the workers of color and Latino workers to also turn out in large numbers for Donald Trump, which they did not. And I went to a couple of Trump rallies, and it was really, really frightening. Like, I've not been in a situation before where I've actually, been more worried for my physical safety as a journalist. Yes, he was talking about trade, but the enormous cheers that he got were for... I happened to be there at the one where he first said, we're going to ban all Muslims from entering the United States. And that was, the crowd went wild. And when he was saying, tossing out stereotypes about Mexicans. It's, I don't know. I think obviously we can talk as well about in terms of populism and the appeal of Bernie Sanders here, but it's, I don't think relying on a purely economic analysis is sufficient if you're talking about that election, particularly not in the United States, because so much of the structure of class politics in the United States is swallowed by, the centuries of baked-in racism. There is, this long history of the politics of race being substituted for the politics of class there. And it's written into the pre and post Jim Crow era. The ways that these laws were formed, people were as a way. I'm not explaining myself very well. I apologize. I'm trying to speak a little slower, if you can believe that, for people who are doing the translating. But if you go back through the texts, you can see politicians from the mid-1800s deliberately trying to create an architecture of division between white workers and workers of color in order to dissipate the kind of class resentment there. So I think you can trace that line right through to this idea we have now of the white working class worldwide. Why is the whiteness of the working class so very important? I mean, why aren't we talking also about the black working class and the Latino working class? Is this not equally? Yeah.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, of course, the racist element is sort of, so it's not even being hidden. It's so out there, and he's so obvious about it, and that's kind of why the trolls loved him so much, because he was saying the things that used to be said in code. But if you look at those three big figures, say Trump, Hillary, and then Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was offering a radical, relatively speaking, radical change economically without any of those elements. And guess who's the most popular political figure in America right now? Bernie Sanders is. and Trump is at an all-time low in his figures. So it's not that, there's a sort of choice between, is it about race or is it about economics? I mean, they're both in there. But the thing to learn from it is that if you only have the kind of liberal cultural politics without the economic change on offer, as Hillary did, it's not going to be, it's not going to move anyone. It's not going to be popular.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, we should bring you in. We can just talk, let's ignore all the men for the next hour. It's the state. Oh, yeah.
Ja, also unflexibel wie ich bin, komme ich nochmal auf die Ausgangsfrage zurück. Ja, ich bin nicht so ein super freier Redner, habe mir also auch ausbedungen, dass wir vorab die Fragen schon mal zugeschickt bekommen, zumindest ein paar. Es gab dann ja einige Überraschungen. Ich habe mir auch ein paar Sachen notiert. Ja, also man sollte natürlich nie Fragen stellen, die man mit Ja oder mit Nein beantworten kann, weil das nämlich dann genau passieren kann. Also die Frage war, wie stark ist das Internet als Beeinflussungsmaschine wirklich? Ja, oder gibt es diese Radikalisierungstendenzen durch Facebook, durch die Filterblasen? Und ich würde sagen, nein. Und sei es ein erstmal sozusagen methodisches oder polemisches Nein. Die Frage, ich würde tatsächlich sagen, dass die Frage schon bereits das Problem ist, weil sie sozusagen ein gesellschaftliches Problem technologisch formuliert. Also sozusagen das auf das Niveau von, das ist jetzt kein Angriff auf euch, ne? Aber sozusagen auf das Niveau von tatsächlich, ich sag mal, technischen oder technologischen Prozessen runterbricht. Wäre dem so, wäre das das Problem, dann hätten wir natürlich schon längst darauf die entsprechende andere Antithese gehabt im technischen Modus und das Problem wäre gelöst. Letztes Jahr, im Sommer 2016, als sozusagen noch die Zeit war, sich über Trump lustig zu machen, hat Michael Moore, kann man jetzt denken, was man will, aber er hat eine wirklich interessante Rechnung aufgemacht, warum Trump die Wahl gewinnen wird. Und es würden ihm, glaube ich, 25 oder 26% der Stimmen reichen. Es kommt ja nicht auf die Anzahl der gewonnenen Stimmen an oder nur sehr vermittelt, sondern natürlich auf die der Bundesstaaten. Und das heißt also, wenn Trump eine entsprechende Anzahl von Bundesstaaten gewinnt, dann würden auch 25% der Stimmen, der Popular Votes, wie es ja heißt, ausreichen. Interessant an diesem Gedanken, der also nochmal eine ganz andere Richtung einschlägt, ist ja, dass dem ja sozusagen eine Vorstellung einer Manipulierbarkeit zugrunde liegt. Das heißt also, man begegnet gewissermaßen den Wählerinnen und Wählern als eine, beliebig oder bis zu einem hohen Beliebigkeitsgrad manipulierbare Masse. Das wird sozusagen im intellektuellen Diskurs, wenn man sozusagen die Manipulationsschiene aufmacht, sehr schnell verstanden als, okay, wenn ich manipuliere, dann heißt es auch, etwas wird berechenbar und die Möglichkeiten des Widerstands nehmen ab. Ne? Beides ist falsch. Also die Leute, die sich für Trump entschieden haben, haben das ja getan, weil sie ihrer Meinung nach die Manipulation, denen sie ausgesetzt sind und für die dann Hillary Clinton oder der etablierte Washingtoner Politbetrieb stand, entgegengesetzt haben oder dem widersetzt haben. Also sie haben sozusagen einen Versuch der Manipulierung abgelehnt, gleichzeitig sich aber Donald Trump und wir hatten ja gerade schon die Punkte, dieser berühmte ökonomische oder berüchtigte ökonomische Nationalismus, gleichzeitig Donald Trump unterworfen. Also wir haben sozusagen ein Zusammentreffen auf der einen Seite einer Absage an etwas und einer offensichtlich sehr weitgehenden Unterwerfung. Das ist gewissermaßen der schockierende Moment und ich glaube auch das, was sozusagen in der Nachbetrachtung und in der Aufarbeitung die Leute immer noch blendet, weil sozusagen beide Sachen zusammenkommen. Ich würde sagen, auch sogar so weit gehen, dass das Zusammentreffen beider Sachen, also die Absage an eine Manipulierung und die Unterwerfung etwas Totalitäres hat, gleichzeitig aber auch, und das ist sozusagen der Hoffnungsschimmer, etwas sehr Hybrides. Also sozusagen die Mächtigkeit oder der Triumph, den Donald Trump gefeiert hat, steht nicht für, was jetzt nicht das Momentum unterschätzen soll, aber steht nicht für etwas wirklich Substanzielles. Ich wollte noch eine Sache dazu sagen, ja, noch ein letzter Punkt. Ich würde sogar so weit gehen und die Rede von diesen Filterblasen, also sozusagen den Strukturen, die immer wieder sich selber bestätigen, wirklich hinten anzustellen und das nicht als das Problem zu sehen. Es ist tatsächlich, würde ich sagen, eher umgekehrt, dass gewissermaßen die gesellschaftliche Struktur sich den Leuten heute als eine ja, geradezu schmerzhaft transparente darstellt, als eine sozusagen brutal einfache, indem es nämlich um das große Plusmachen geht, um ein, sagen wir mal, geldförmiges Denken und Handeln, das alle Lebensbereiche einer ziemlich einfachen Kalkulation und einem ziemlich einfachen, aber sehr brutalen Regime unterwirft. Und der Rückzug in Filterblasen oder, das wäre der nächste Schritt, Verschwörungstheorien, ist gewissermaßen der Versuch, damit irgendwie klarzukommen, dem eine andere Geschichte abzugewinnen und sozusagen dieser brutal transparenten, totalitär einfachen Struktur wieder, naja, sagen wir mal, so etwas wie ein Geheimnis oder eine Abweichung zu verleihen, die es de facto nicht gibt. Und das wäre meines Erachtens der Punkt, wo eine linke Diskussion anschließen müsste.
Okay, jetzt sozusagen kommen wir aber nochmal zu einzelnen Akteuren des Internets zurück, und zwar Laurie. Als ich deinen Artikel gelesen habe auf Spiegel Online über die Internetfigur Milo Yiannopoulos, ich hoffe, ich habe ihn richtig ausgesprochen. Okay.
That's not why I'm wincing.
Und zwar, er ist meiner, würde man sagen, europäischen Antifa-Aufmerksamkeit einfach jahrelang entgangen. Und du beschreibst ihn aber so als eine Marke. Er tritt auf mit dem Slogan The Dangerous Faggot, hat aber eigentlich gar keinen Inhalt, außer dem Streben nach Ruhm und ist ja Freuen an seinem eigenen Ruhm. Dieser Ruhm entsteht durch das Beleidigen und Lustigmachen über Minderheiten und Frauen. Aber anders als viele andere hast du ja sozusagen mit ihm persönlich öfter mal was zu tun gehabt. Und deswegen meine Frage an dich, wie würdest du diese Figur beschreiben?
All right. I will never be free of Milo Yiannopoulos, it seems. Look, I think it's quite important to... we were talking backstage more about, the idea, is Milo, is Richard Spencer, are any of these people really racist? And the focus in some of the profiles that have been written is on, the sincerity or lack of sincerity behind these people. And in the original piece that I wrote, I was trying to, draw people's attention to the fact that there's a howling insincerity at the heart of a lot of this messaging. Not from everyone. There are a great deal of true believers who are leading this movement. I think Geert Wilders is one of them. On the international far right. I think Donald Trump is to some extent a true believer, although there is an aspect in which he will also say anything in order to get attention for himself. He knows how to manipulate the attention economy in that way. But I think the important thing to recognize is that sincerity or lack of sincerity doesn't matter in the end. Individual character does not matter. It doesn't matter at all whether or not somebody like Milo believes in his heart that he's a good person. It doesn't matter whether somebody like Richard Spencer, deep in his heart, believes that people of color are less than human. What matters is how they act. What matters is how they spur other people into action. And I think in lots of this discussion, and not just about the far right, but also about the center right and the more mainstream end of conservatism and neo-reaction. The focus is on well, are these people really racist? How can we think of ourselves? There is an anxiety to think of white people as good, as inherently good, to find an excuse whereby white people can still believe that we and people like us and people who look like us had good intentions. Whatever it was that we did, we had good intentions. And I think this question, what's this person like? I tried to answer it by not answering it, by saying, yeah, this person is like this, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what somebody believes and feels in their heart. I can't know what anybody, even just anybody on this panel, feels and believes in their heart. It doesn't matter. What matters is words and actions. Is that a sufficient answer? No. Who said no? All right.
Ja.
What else do you guys want to know? Oh.
Ich stelle nur die Frage. Oder vielleicht ergänzend dazu an Angela. Milo Yiannopoulos hast du dir auch angeguckt. Oder er war sozusagen zumindest auch für dich interessant. Wie würdest du beschreiben, wir lassen den Menschen völlig beiseite, aber wie funktionieren seine Kampagnen oder wie agiert er im Unterschied zu den Hard Old Rights oder zu sozusagen den klassischen Rechten? Kannst du es vielleicht ein bisschen beschreiben?
Milo is part of a group of people that are pejoratively called by the alt-right, the alt-light. So they're the diet version, it's meant to be an insult. They're the inauthentic sort of version of the alt-right. I think he's part of a group of people who wanted to transgress sort of taboos and to be un-PC, not politically correct, and to perhaps get attention in that way. But I mean, I think, you know, he genuinely doesn't like political correctness, and that was kind of his goal. But I think in the end, it sort of became obvious that he didn't really have any politics. Like, he didn't really have any conclusions or any ideas about what to do with this information, you know? So, I mean, the campus tour was ramping up every time, and the statements were getting more wild and more offensive. And if you listen to them, particularly towards the end, you would get the impression that Western civilization is just about to go off the cliff. You know, the whole thing is going to be destroyed if we don't build a wall and change immigration policies and do things like that. But I mean, beyond building the wall and sort of, you know, being insensitive about language and stuff like that, he didn't really have any ideas, any formalized politics that I could ever work out. In fact, when it came to suggesting things that he was actually for, a lot of the stuff that he said was kind of quite standard classical liberal fare, you know. And so to me, he is different from Richard Spencer, for example. I mean, you know, the people on the alt-right have goals. They're very clear about them. You know, they write manifestos. You don't have to try to work out what they think. They're very clear. And I think Milo really doesn't know what he thinks. So he's different politically in that he's some kind of a weird version of a classical liberal mixed in with that kind of ultra-offensive style, but that it's essentially a not fully worked through political program.
Would you say it's a pose whereby, like, the aesthetics of transgression are more important than the actual substance with somebody like Milo? Like, I think you write in your book really so well about this idea of transgression and rebellion and just hating PC culture, and this fetish that the alt-right and the alt-light and all of their fellow travelers have for appearing underground and appearing counterculture. I'm wondering if, like, you can talk a little more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the way, I suppose, that they got sort of young people to be attracted to the right in a way that they hadn't been before. Like, I contrast Milo Yiannopoulos to Pat Buchanan, you know, because Milo kind of compared his own culture war in his tour to Pat Buchanan's culture war, but of course they're totally different because Buchanan is a real, you know, conservative. And Milo just isn't a conservative in any way that you can work out. I mean, right before the big scandal that kind of destroyed his career, he went on the Bill Maher show and he was asked, "Are you a conservative?" And his answer was something like, "Well, I believe in free speech, and today if you believe in free speech, you're a conservative. So therefore I'm a conservative," which doesn't really make any sense. Because there has to be some, you know, there has to be some meaning that is just attached to the word in some stable way. It can't just move around like that. So in terms of the transgression stuff, I mean, I think that was that was how they did it. But it does have some, you know, it does have a political function, because to them the problem is, and I don't think they've looked very far beyond this, but to them the problem now is that political correctness is a barrier to what might come next. And their goal then is breaking down every taboo. The problem is that when you do that, what comes after, you know, and like the alt-right is what comes after, you know, because you're essentially clearing the ground for them. You've told a whole generation of young people, you know, that it's like these are like funny things to say and it's all just a game. And then the politically serious, frankly much smarter people, way to the far right, come in and they just take the territory because they've thought through the ideas and they have answers.
And ironically, of course, what destroyed Milo's career is the one taboo that people run up against, and it's like, no, hang on, that's too far. We'll talk about how, black people are less than human and will call out transgender people and identify immigrants and women are feminazis, but oh no, you can't talk about pedophilia. No, that's too much. Like they hit their wall of censorship and political correctness, which I'm not saying it's a great thing to talk about, underage sex, but it's ironic that they did find something. Actually, it was, there are limits to this stuff. It's I find that deeply ironic. It's
Okay, ich weiß nicht, ob Milo. Sonst noch über Nekrophilie spricht, das weiß ich nicht genau, ob das sozusagen noch der nächste Tabu wäre. Aber wenn es denn so ist, dass tatsächlich der Erfolg dadurch vonstatten geht, dass diese politische Agenda überhaupt nicht mehr da ist und Milo eigentlich nur noch so eine Art miese Unterhaltungskultur ist oder Popkultur, dann ist so ein bisschen das Verrückte, oder was folgt daraus dann, dass da sozusagen eine bestimmte Form von Enttabuisierung oder Tabubruch sozusagen etabliert wird als Form, und trotzdem die Rechten damit sozusagen relativ großen Zulauf haben. Ich will das an Felix nochmal weitergeben als Frage.
Genau. Also es gibt dieses berühmte Zitat, der Feind ist unsere eigene Frage als Gestalt. Wird immer Carl Schmitt zugeschrieben, stammt aber tatsächlich allerdings von einem Carl Schmitt, von ihm dann bewunderten expressionistischen Dichter, namens Theodor Deubler, und war aus dem Gedicht, wo er sozusagen seine melancholische Position im Ersten Weltkrieg, sprich die britischen Soldaten an, zum Ausdruck bringt. Also der Feind ist unsere eigene Frage als Gestalt. Und ich bin tatsächlich auch auf Milo erst über Lauries wirklich ganz wunderbaren Essay, der auch auf Deutsch erschienen ist, gestoßen. Und das Ergebnis ist natürlich paradox, weil sozusagen diese, sag ich mal, es ist ja keine Abrechnung, sondern es ist wirklich eine sehr schöne Reportage und es ist tatsächlich gewissermaßen das Beste, was man über diesen Mann schreiben kann, sozusagen paradox gesehen. Ne? Also Milo tritt natürlich so auf oder inszeniert sich natürlich so, als wäre er tatsächlich jetzt jemand aus der, in dem Fall schwulen Counterculture oder zumindest aus einer schwulen Kultur, die sehr lange in der Counterculture war und der jetzt gewissermaßen in die politische Arena stolpert. Und das ist schon erstmal eine Herausforderung. Ich finde aber, und ich habe dann im Anschluss meiner Lektüre dann auch versucht, mir Sachen von ihm anzugucken. Ich habe das sehr ausführlich gemacht, aber immer nur 10 Minuten. Weil es ist eine Qual. Es ist vielleicht anders, wenn man ihn erlebt. Dann hat es vielleicht noch so einen Moment des Dramas oder so einer zirzensischen Veranstaltung. Aber wenn man das gewissermaßen vermittelt durch den Bildschirm sieht, ist das nach 10 Minuten unerträglich. Aber also auch unter dem Gesichtspunkt, was hat er eigentlich inhaltlich zu sagen? Oder gibt es überhaupt irgendwas, wo man mit seinem klassisch linken oder aufklärerischen Besteck drangehen könnte? Aber interessant ist doch, dass er, und sei es noch so kurz, das Interview oder das Feature über ihn oder die Rede, dass er ja die ganze Zeit betont, dass er schwul ist. Die ganze Zeit, und zwar ziemlich früh. Und er macht es unaufgefordert und er macht es sozusagen, es ist so der Basso Continuo. Und das ist interessant, das ist wirklich interessant. Warum macht er das? Es war ja sozusagen, es gibt ja dieses Zitat von Max Gold, ja, wo Max Gold sagt, Schwulsein ist nicht abendfüllend. Es ging doch bei diesen sogenannten Protesten, bei den Protesten der sogenannten Minderheiten doch nicht darum zu sagen, naja, wir sind schwul, sondern es ging ja immer um konkrete Forderungen. Im Falle der AIDS-Katastrophe Zugang zu gleicher medizinischer Betreuung. Es ging um Durchsetzung von Sichtbarkeit. Es ging um Abschaffung bestimmter Gesetze. Das heißt also, diese ganzen Kämpfe sind natürlich alle und völlig zu Recht gegen dieses Konstrukt der Minderheit und haben, indem sie sozusagen ein politisches Anliegen formulieren, ja, und sagen, ey Leute, es geht doch nicht darum, ob wir jetzt schwul sind oder nicht, sondern es geht einfach darum, alle brauchen den gleichen Zugang zu einer angemessenen medizinischen Behandlung. Das kann man auf andere Felder, auf andere Gruppen erweitern. Stichwort Bildung, was weiß ich. Es geht also immer sozusagen über den konstruierten und über den zwangsweise zugewiesenen Status einer Minderheit hinaus. Deshalb hat das ein universalistisches Moment, das es unbedingt zu verteidigen gilt. Und deshalb, da kommen wir aber gleich drauf, ist natürlich die Gegenüberstellung von sogenannten Minderheiteninteressen und kernigen Arbeiterinteressen Bullshit. Weil allein schon diese Gegenüberstellung, also zu sagen, komm, wir müssen jetzt weg von diesem ganzen Gedöns und hin zu den Brot- und Butterfragen, eigentlich schon den Universalismus dieser Kämpfe betrügt. Milo sagt aber die ganze Zeit, ich bin schwul. Und ich habe mich gefragt oder ich habe darüber spekuliert, was könnte denn der Hintergrund sein? Man könnte natürlich zum einen sagen, gut, es ist sozusagen eine hysterische Selbstvergewisserung gegenüber seinem Milieu, damit ja keiner sagt, ey, wir wussten ja gar nicht, dass der schwul war, dann hätten wir den sofort erschossen. So, er sagt also die ganze Zeit, na Leute, ihr wisst ja Bescheid, könnte man so sehen. Ist die eine Sache. Die andere Sache ist natürlich, dass er erfolgreich hat, dass er Erfolg ist, dass er sozusagen sich nach oben orientiert und dass er sozusagen seinen Status, den er so offen vor sich herträgt und so politisiert, im Grunde genommen als Abgrenzung nach unten meint. Also es geht nicht mehr darum, dass irgendwas damit verbunden ist, was diese Konstruktion einer Minderheit hinter sich lässt oder zerstört, irgendeine politische Forderung, sondern es geht einfach nur darum zu sagen, ich bin's, Milo, ich habe Erfolg, ich habe es geschafft und ihr nicht. Und es ist im Grunde genommen also eine Art Umdrehung oder eine Zerstörung genau dieses Universalismus. Es ist eigentlich genau die Identitätspolitik, die er den als Social Justice Warrior Denunzierten immer vorwirft. Und das ist tatsächlich, und da kommt man, wenn man das mag, wirklich zu so etwas wie einer inhaltlichen Diskussion, dass es bei diesen ganzen Ritualen natürlich darum geht, sich abzugrenzen, und zwar nach unten abzugrenzen, gegenüber dem Pöbel, gegenüber den Verlierern, gegenüber den Leuten, die es nicht geschafft haben und die deshalb zum Beispiel auf staatliche Hilfsprogramme, auf den Sozialstaat und so weiter, also wir reden ja in Amerika über diese Bereiche, setzen müssen. Also letztendlich, wenn auch sehr vermittelt, drückt sich darin also in dieser Selbstzuschreibung und in diesem Selbstmarketing der Hass auf die Armen, der Hass auf die Abgehängten. Und zwar in identitätspolitischer Formulierung aus.
Okay, wir wollen sozusagen jetzt von der einzelnen Figur Milo mal wegkommen, bleiben sozusagen in den USA, und zwar Laurie. Du hast in deinem Buch in dem Kapitel zur US-Wahl 2016 das Tagebuch darüber häufig das Wort Faschismus verwandt. Beispielsweise, wenn du schreibst, man kann den Faschismus nicht aufhalten, indem man Facebook ausschaltet und ein paar Atemübungen macht. Trump nennst du einen orangefarbenen Hitler. Ist die Trump-Bewegung eine neue faschistische Bewegung für dich? Ist das so ähnlich wie in Europa in den 1930er Jahren?
I'm sorry? I don't think we're arguing that capital is not the problem here, dude. Like, capitalism is a big problem, yeah, but I'm not sure why you're shouting that at me. Can you explain? You want to stand up and have a talk? Seriously.
Very problematic, der Kapitalismus.
All right, sure, okay. And like, I'm not trying to, obviously we're trying to have a conversation and I'm sitting up here and talking in my first language and you're sitting down there talking in your second, so I recognize the vectors of that. I'm not trying to take the piss, but this is something I hear a lot as a kind of retort to the politics of, either direct anti-fascism or what is often written off as, identity politics, meaning feminist politics, or anti-racist politics, there ideally should, and what you said earlier about the the way the Democratic Party shat the bed over the last election in the US is absolutely true. I don't think you can formulate a successful or useful feminist or anti-racist or classically liberal, in the way that we're using it now, politics without addressing capital at the core of your movement. But equally, I don't believe that just yelling capital is the problem as a way to shut up any discussion of racism or anti-fascism or feminism is going to work. You cannot do anti-capitalism successfully without anti-racism and feminism at its core, not just because it's not fair, but because it's intellectually bankrupt. It's a misreading of how labor and social value is organized. So yeah, that's, and I'm not saying that you're saying that. Thank you. I'm sorry, what was the question? Just remind me, just give me a keyword, because then I'll remember.
Fascism.
Fascism, yeah, that thing. Oh God, it's always more exciting to have a fight between somebody else on the left than actually address fascism. So maybe this is a little psychodrama of that. So, no, let me argue with this guy over here. Fascism is still the problem. Right. So this is a really interesting question to answer in Germany. So thank you. Yeah, it is. Look, the way we use language and the way we examine our history in different nations in the world is more and more fascinating to me as somebody who writes about politics and the weight of cultural memory and how that influences contemporary politics and elections. Look, I use the word Nazi and the word fascist without being as discriminating as I probably would were I a German person, right? I absolutely own that. I'm not apologizing for it because I do that in a strategic way, right? Especially when you're talking to or about people on, let's just group them all together we can talk about that later, obviously, and say the new far right, the alt-right white supremacists. When you're talking to a lot of these people, what you have to understand is that most of these people, deep in their hearts, believe that they are the good guys. They believe that they're on the side of right and truth and justice. I mean, almost everybody in the world does. And if you say to those people, you're a racist, nobody believes in their heart that they're a racist, even if they are one. And they will just say, well, no, these opinions I have, they're not really racist opinions. You can look at science. I've found this, cod evolutionary paper. And they'll argue. But if you say to those people, some of whom have quite a basic analysis, you are a Nazi. These people you are following are Nazis. They understand that that's bad, because they've been to the cinema, they've seen cartoon villains, and Nazis are the great monster still in our recent cultural imagination. Whether that's correct or incorrect, and I think that's a really productive discussion. That's why I do it. I'm not sure if that's, the only correct response. I understand that in the way you discuss the differences between fascism, Nazism, National Socialism here is different to the way we discuss it, in the English-speaking world. But one of the hallmarks, and I think you address this in your book as well, of the new right is indeed that there is not a organizing party. Really, that's one of the most interesting things about it. It's actually the person who originally pointed this out to me was my younger sister, who is like me but cleverer and with better hair, and she said, look at these guys from Defend Europe, this ridiculous, fake pirate movement. You're a pirate now, but it's oh my God, it's sorry. Really, they think that, the answer to defending Europe is to charter a boat and pursue a merry life of piracy on the high seas. and they accidentally smuggled immigrants into Europe. Did you catch that? No, they chartered a boat. If anybody doesn't know this, it's the most wonderful thing. I think it's one of their first stops after they chartered the boat, because of course none of them know how to sail because they're not actually pirates. They stopped the ship, and like 21 Sri Lankan immigrants immediately claimed asylum. Which is I just want to see the movie of it. Like, I don't. But what's interesting about those people is that it's like an entrepreneurial gig economy fascism. It's like everybody's their own, fascist node. Like people like Milo, he's not a member of a party. He stands for himself. It's a branding exercise. Richard Spencer is not, I don't believe, a member of a party or a leader of a party. These people are kind of internet figures. They're memes. It's like, it's like the TaskRabbit of fascism. Like Uber, but for white supremacy. Which would be hilarious if these people weren't also currently sort of winning. I'll stop talking now. Oh God, there's one of, oh God. Thanks.
Aber vielleicht ist der Hinweis auf Angels. No? What? Did you hear something? Yeah. Auf Deutsch? Auf Englisch? Kein Problem. Vielleicht ist trotzdem der Hinweis, wie du sozusagen mit dem Begriff der Faschisten oder vielleicht umgehst in deinem Buch. Nochmal der Hinweis auf dein Buch. Magst du uns über den neuen Kulturkampf oder den Culture War, vor allem wir im Internet im Vorfeld der Wahlen, die dann zu Trump geführt wurde. Magst du die Thesen aus deinem Buch kurz vorstellen oder nochmal zusammenfassen und uns aufs Podium bringen? Sorry.
This is the question that every author hates getting, so...
There's a couple of arguments running through the book, and I guess the main one is probably, it has to do with the relationship between the alt-right and counterculture. And in some ways I'm sort of thinking through the idea throughout the book. So, when I started looking at certainly 4chan and a lot of the early versions of that alt-light Milo kind of style, trolley style, it did have a lot of the features of counterculture. And, I think that if you're on the left, your natural reaction is to say, oh, but they can't be counterculture because they're on the right. So then I started thinking, but that really doesn't make any sense. What if they are a counterculture, and what's so great about counterculture? And then, the title, Kill All Normies, is about kind of their being happy to be that kind of, counterculture on the fringe, outside of the mainstream, kind of, saying offensive things and saying outrageous things and so on. And I guess it looked at the styles of transgression, and I was trying to root them in something different than, they tended to be called conservative at the beginning, or they were conflated with the conservative right. And to me, the most important thing, which kind of feels a bit obvious now, but at the time I thought it was worth kind of trying to theorize that their roots are essentially countercultural. So I talk about different avant-garde movements. I talk about the Marquis de Sade and this idea that you should just transgress everything, destroy everything that's sacred, and that this alone is actually a political goal that's worthwhile. So it's essentially describing them, trying to theorize them as something separate from the conservative tradition. And it's also arguing that maybe we need to rethink the value of counterculture, and also the value of kind of regarding mainstream tastes and mainstream politics ultimately, and most people as some kind of problem that if you have to, if you have anything interesting to say, you have to be working against always whatever is the mainstream. Well, I mean, if you want to become a mass movement, that's not necessarily a good position to start off with. So it was very much about kind of thinking about is there still value in the idea of counterculture? I'm increasingly moving towards saying no, and thinking about, is there something actually wrong with the fact that we cannot break out of this idea that if something is worthwhile culturally, it must be anti-mainstream. It must offend the beliefs of mainstream society. We must always be this subculture on the margins, because obviously that's not where you want to be politically. Ultimately, I think that's kind of, and then like the rest of it is just sort of a map of all the different groups. So it goes through like pickup artists and men going their own way, which is a male separatist group.
They're fascinating.
And all the various little forums and groups that made up the whole kind of ecosystem of these new, certainly anti-left movements or reactionary movements. Not all of them are alt-right, and if you say so online, all the alt-right people will go nuts. So there's lots of different groups, and it was sort of mapping those and then trying to work through those kind of ideas.
That was a really hard thing she just did, so everybody should give her a clap and also buy the book.
Okay, wenn das Buch sozusagen die neue Rechte auch versucht sozusagen als Gegenkultur zu begreifen oder versucht zu gucken, wo kommt das sozusagen zum Teil her und warum ist das trotz dieser Wurzeln in einer Art Gegenkultur oder in einer Off-Scene so recht erfolgreich oder sehr, sehr populär. Fragt sich wiederum die deutsche Linke in letzter Zeit sehr häufig, verdammte Mist, warum haben wir eigentlich so wahnsinnig lange selber uns um Nischenkulturen oder Gegenkulturen oder Minderheiten gekümmert und ist eventuell das daran schuld, dass Rechtspopulisten Zulauf bekommen haben? Also sozusagen hoffentlich nicht zu blöd komplex oder von der anderen Seite rum. Die andere Frage, die wir uns hier sozusagen relativ häufig stellen oder was sozusagen aufploppt, ist, müssten nicht eigentlich ein bestimmtes Segment, auf das die Linken sehr gerne zielt, nämlich der Arbeiter, sozusagen eigentlich per se die Linke wählen und warum verdammt tut er das nicht oder tut er das so selten oder er tut es und wir merken es nicht so genau, warum gibt es eigentlich sozusagen diesen Streit oder diese Versuche der Linken zu schauen, ist das ein Widerspruch, dass wir uns jahrelang um Spezialinteressen von gut organisierten Minderheiten gekümmert haben? Hätten wir anstattdessen nicht eher die Nöte der Arbeiterklasse darauf führen müssen oder anderer Verlierer des Systems irgendwie uns dafür einsetzen müssen? Aber funktioniert das eigentlich in dieser Gegenüberstellung? Ist an dieser Kritik, die die Linke sozusagen ein bisschen selbstkasteisch momentan gerade macht, funktioniert das, Felix, oder gibt es da sozusagen Für- oder Gegensprachen?
Can I go? Do you want to go first? No, you don't. I'm just like, now you can see like this is the heart of my personality because I'm just going, oh me, no me, pick me. I just
First Felix.
I'm that annoying, yeah. So now I've set it up, it's going to be awful. Look, I think there is a false binary here between so-called minority interests and real politics of the working class, whatever they happen to be. And we've been told, and I'm sure like everybody here must have encountered this at some point on the left, if you are on the left, which is being told that women and queer people and people of color, all of your concerns will just be sorted out after the revolution, whenever it comes. We'll deal with capitalism first, which means dealing mainly with the politics of white, male, straight people, and for some reason that leap is logical in their minds. And then you can have your little woman thing and your little, non-white people thing. And we talk about these as minority issues, but they're not minority issues. I mean, most people in the UK, like the face of a working class person in the United Kingdom is more likely to be a woman, more likely to be a person of color. In the United States, that's even more the case. The idea that quote-unquote identity issues and the non-identitarian politics of the working class are at odds is something I think we really need to abandon on the left. And this idea is there was so many articles, particularly after that election, and also after Brexit in the UK, saying, well, maybe it was all our fault. Maybe it was we just went too hard on the woman thing and, the whole anti-racist thing. Maybe we just table that for a while. Maybe we went too hard. And yeah, I think some of it may well have been because of a backlash against the liberation or, the attempted liberation of women and people of color. But I don't think that means that it was wrong. I think that means that it made people angry and we have to come down harder on it. I would say that because I'm not a politician, but it's this idea that, well, look, one thing I'd say in the book is that all politics are identity politics. The politics of, white working class men is a politics of identity, but that identitarianism is rendered invisible by the idea that white working class men's politics are universal and everybody else's politics is just a side issue, a minority issue. But yeah, what Angela said earlier about the Democratic Party, for example, is absolutely right. There has been this idea that you could give people sops to kind of a neoliberal school of feminism and a kind of light, sop to anti-racism without actually dealing with structural issues of economic power, and that would be enough. And I don't think it's enough. It's never enough, and the rise of politicians like Bernie Sanders and Corbyn in the UK should be a lesson to that. Oh, tough.
Darf ich 3 Punkte sagen? Also der erste Punkt, ich versuche es ganz kurz zu machen. Der erste Punkt, warum werden sie eigentlich nicht mehr gewählt? Weil so viel mit Minderheiten und so? Nee, weil die Linke einfach sich in den letzten 30, 40 Jahren angewöhnt hat, eine Virtuosin der Enttäuschung zu sein. Es gab Wellen von Linksregierungen und sie haben alles nur noch schlimmer gemacht. Das ist, glaube ich, der entscheidende Grund. Das ist Dann das andere. Das ist ja sozusagen auch eine Abrechnung, auch wenn das jetzt immer weiter zurückliegt, aber sozusagen ist es unabgegolten in der Geschichte. Eine Abrechnung mit 68. Und es war doch so, wenn wir uns doch mal angucken, die Kämpfe, die vielleicht auch in einer interessierten Geschichtsschreibung als nicht wirklich vermittelt dastehen mit der Arbeitswelt, Feminismus, der Christopher Street Day und so weiter. Tatsächlich zielten noch, das war vorhin mein Punkt, zielten noch alle diese Kämpfe auf Verbreiterung ab. Die Kämpfe waren ja kein Rückzug, keine Nischenpolitik, sondern es ging um genau das Gegenteil, um raus aus der Nische, raus aus der Unsichtbarkeit, raus aus der Abdrängung zu kommen. Ja, man ging sozusagen dialektisch den Weg darum, dann müssen wir alleine anfangen, ja, oder wir müssen uns auch teilweise absondern. Es gab mal in Köln eine kleine Arbeitsgruppe, die sich mit 1968 in Detroit auseinandergesetzt hat, was ganz interessant war, weil 68 in Detroit wirklich kaum studentisch geprägt war, sondern von Arbeitskämpfen. Und zwar von Arbeitskämpfen von schwarzen Automobilarbeitern. Also Leute, die sich auch ganz bewusst in syndikalistische Blacks-Only-Gewerkschaftszellen abgesondert haben. Aber doch nicht um einen Kulturalismus, also es waren Gegner der Black Panther, nicht um einen Kulturalismus aufzumachen, sondern um zu sagen, okay, die Gewerkschaft in den USA, die politische Vertretung, einschließlich so Wurmfortsätze wie der KP und irgendwelchen Trotzkisten, sind fundamental rassistisch, auch wenn sie sagen, natürlich alles Antirassisten, aber fundamental rassistisch strukturiert, weil es nie um die Bedürfnisse und nie um die Segmentierung und die spezielle Gestaltung des Arbeitsplatzes geht, der oder die eine Gruppe von Arbeitern, in dem Fall Schwarze, besonders benachteiligen. Das heißt also, man hat sich abgespalten, aber nicht um sozusagen einen Separatismus durchzuziehen, sondern zu sagen, okay, wir bündeln die Kräfte, die wir haben und machen sozusagen die exemplarische Aktion in der Hoffnung, dass sich vermittelt darüber so etwas wie eine Klasseneinheit herstellt. Um jetzt zurückzukommen, also so, ich denke mal, dass, wenn wir über diese Gegenüberstellung, die ich falsch finde, reden, dann müsste man natürlich dazu kommen, warum sie uns heute eigentlich so geläufig ist. Und sie ist bestimmt nicht deswegen geläufig, weil sozusagen es da irgendwie eine Verdrängung oder einen Konkurrenzkampf gab, also um Aufmerksamkeit. Ja? Die sogenannten gut organisierten Minderheiten lassen die Arbeiterinteressen in den Hintergrund treten. Und das Problem ist aber natürlich ganz klar, eine Linke, die gewissermaßen in Kategorien denkt wie kümmern oder wir müssen uns kümmern oder wir müssen was abwägen, gegeneinander stellen und so, die hat natürlich ganz klar verloren. Also ich hatte jetzt, das macht heute die CDU, das macht heute die SPD, da ist tatsächlich auf so einer pragmatischen Ebene kein großer Unterschied. Ich war aus beruflichen Gründen letzte Woche mit einem recht hohen CDU-Vertreter in Köln unterwegs, auch Vorsitzender des Stadtentwicklungsausschusses. Und natürlich sind das Leute, die sehen sich die Großstadt-CDU und wollen natürlich auch keine Gentrifizierung und wollen natürlich auch das autonome Zentrum nicht vertreiben und so. Also wenn man jetzt wirklich in einem Modus des Paternalismus, also wir müssen uns kümmern und wir müssen sozusagen die Interessen oder so abwägen und in einer Reihenfolge bringen, ja, dann braucht man keine Linke.
Populism, some of the things you were talking about, in Ireland, the party that are always described by the liberal mainstream media as dangerous populists are Sinn Féin. And they're also nationalists, but they're on the left. Obviously, that's a very particular product of Ireland's history because the anti-imperialist struggle had to take on the form of nationalism. But that doesn't apply sort of elsewhere. But it is still interesting, though, that the label of populist is applied to the left in Ireland, essentially. It's also applied to the Socialist Party. And the idea is, and when you're sympathetic to the people who are being called populists, you kind of you start to see the media from the perspective of the Trump people, because you start going, yeah, they are snobs, actually, and they are really annoyed by, the masses sort of getting to vote and stuff like that and having any influence on anything. So I don't know. I mean, I don't really have a point there. It's just sort of an interesting thing. I get why people don't trust the mainstream media and why there is that kind of populist feeling around. It's an anti-establishment populist kind of feeling that could take lots of different forms, and it need not take a right-wing form, On the question of the identity politics and the politics of class not being in competition or whatever, the problem is that if you are dealing with a situation where there is a scarcity of housing and jobs and stuff like that, some people might, that clearly that is where some of the right-wing sentiment is coming from, right? Because they're saying, I have to compete with new immigrants for jobs and housing and stuff like that. And there's not such a scarcity of housing here, as I understand, but in the UK and Ireland, it's an absolute crisis. So, I'm not saying that's something we should legitimize and sort of be encouraging a situation where we have to sort of choose one over the other. But the fact is that there are lots of people who feel that those two things are in competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the idea. The feeling is what matters here, but feelings are not facts. And it's very, very hard to convince men of this in particular. Your feelings are not a fact. facts. I know it's really hard to admit to having feelings if you've been socialized in patriarchy. I'm not talking to you, I'm just looking at you. I'm talking to you, I'm not talking about you. I'm sure you're in touch with your feelings.
I'm not.
But, oh, yeah. But look, like on the issue of housing and immigration, this is a perfect example, right? Because if you look at just how the Brexit vote broke down in the UK, the UK has a huge housing crisis, and the crisis is worse in London, where there are up to 500,000 empty homes in the UK. Many of them are in London. They are kind of bought up by people who see no reason to rent them. Rents have gone up by, at least a third in the last 7 years. This is a huge crisis. But London did not vote Brexit. The areas of the UK which are most densely populated tend also to be the areas where you're more likely to actually know immigrants and people who are, visibly not white in Britain living on your street. And if you look at how the Brexit vote broke down, it's the places which were most likely to vote to leave the EU and to say that their main worry was that migrants would take their jobs and their homes. They're the places where that was actually least likely to happen. And the weaponization of this kind of this is the weaponization of identity politics, but it's coming from the mainstream right. It's who has told them that immigrants are coming for their jobs and houses. It's the Daily Mail. It's the mainstream press in the UK that is pumping out this propaganda. So yeah, this this idea of race and nationality being used to divide the working class from each other, that's absolutely happening, but it's happening, it's not happening as much I don't think it's as much of a problem on the left as we seem to believe. It's a problem on the right. That's how it's been weaponized.
Das ist auf jeden Fall was Laurie auch das ist was du in dem Buch relativ stark auch machst. Also wenn wir über Identitätspolitik sprechen, ist es nicht dann sozusagen eigentlich das, was wir eigentlich uns anschauen müssen und was wir angreifen müssen, das ist die Identitätspolitik des rechten weißen Mannes. Und das gilt es sozusagen stärker zu kritisieren. Ich hätte jetzt vorgeschlagen, weil wir so relativ viel mixen, dass wir 2 Fragen noch versuchen, wieder in diese Online-Media-Sache zurückzukommen und dann aber tatsächlich hier oben öffnen und versuchen vielleicht alles zu mixen mit euch zusammen. Fabse, magst du die eine Frage noch stellen?
Okay. Wenn wir uns so die Geschichte des Rechtspopulismus angucken, fällt eigentlich auf, dass der immerhin sozusagen, wenn es sozusagen neue Sprünge gab, dass sie zeitgleich oder in ähnlichen Zeitabständen mit sozusagen neuen Medien verbunden waren. In Italien kann man das sagen, Berlusconi ist groß geworden nach der Einführung des Privatfernsehens und das er ja maßgeblich besessen hat. Der Aufstieg in Deutschland von Pegida und AfD oder irgendwelchen Nein zum Heim-Kampagnen fiel auch zusammen mit Social Media, also mit Facebook, Twitter und im Osten halt Yappi. Ist das eine richtige Beobachtung oder ist sozusagen das einfach historischer Zufall, wie halt so Technik ist, entwickelt sich halt immer weiter, man kann immer sagen, okay, ab da war es was Neues. Ich würde mal die Frage als erstes Felix stellen und nicht? Okay.
I think the internet did have a lot to do actually with this stuff. Not the Trump vote as such, or the Brexit vote or whatever, but on that question of sort of making the right attractive to young people and stuff like that. I mean, one of the things I do in my book is sort of list some of the viewing figures for, InfoWars, Lauren Southern, Gavin McInnes, all these sort of alt-light, and they were the people who were really excellent at media, building alternative media. And, they had an entire alternative media world built up, particularly on YouTube. A friend of mine was just saying the other day, you can almost guess the politics of someone by what platform they're on. So Tumblr is identity politics, YouTube is alt-right, and podcasts are the left. Podcasts are socialism. For some reason, there's loads and loads of socialist podcasts. So obviously, you know, politics are taking on some kind of, there is a relationship here. And when you look at those kind of viewing figures, many people, when Trump got elected, when everyone was kind of flailing around going, how has this happened? Who are these people? You know, everyone wanted to know what's Pepe and, you know, all hand signs and all these kinds of different things. And a lot of people were seeing for the very first time these figures that other people had been watching daily for years. I mean, you know, when I was looking at some of the sales figures for my book, and I noticed like Tommy Robinson's book, it was like at number 40 or something, which is out years at this point. You know, these ideas are, you know, they are developing this big, mainly online alternative media audience, and they are making it into the mainstream that way. I mean, the left has been talking about building alternative media for years, you know, usually with references to Chomsky and so on. So obviously we felt or feel that that is a worthwhile thing to do, and you know, so I don't see why you would say it's not worthwhile when the right do it. I mean, clearly they are reaching people. Their viewing figures are in the millions. Look at their Twitter followers. They're hugely popular, and the thing is, the online world does encourage that kind of rabbit hole thing. You know, if you watch one Milo video, you're going to be watching Milo videos for years, because every time you go online, it'll be recommending them to you, you know, and likewise, Amazon will be recommending, you know, George's Cross car stickers or whatever, if you look at the Tommy Robinson one. So if you go down that rabbit hole, you are going to be looking at terrifying stuff every day, and you are going to be you know, meeting people who have never been exposed to it at all. And so that kind of, you know, world that sort of existed when I was a kid, where everyone watched sort of RTE, like the state broadcaster, and everyone read the same 2 or 3 newspapers, and there was an arena, and that was where the conversations went on. There was one arena where the whole society could kind of take part in discussions. Now there are all these little worlds that are quite separate, and they're in many cases not even aware of the existence of one another. So that seems to be surely why politics is so fragmented, and why particularly the world of conspiracies kind of flourishes there as well.
Linke Medienpolitik setzt ja sozusagen am Faschismusschock an. Und wenn man sozusagen Texte aus den 30er oder 40er Jahren oder knapp davor liest, dann geht es natürlich auch immer darum, um die Hoffnung, okay, die Mikrofone müssen freigegeben werden. Also damals gab es noch keine Bildschirme, sondern man dachte mit Mikrofon natürlich an die Radioübertragung oder an die Reden auf Parteitagen. So, und jetzt sind ja die Mikrofone freigegeben, ja, oder die Speicherplätze sind frei, und wir haben genau das. Ne? Wir haben wir haben eben diese nicht Öffentlichkeit von unten, sondern maximal Öffentlichkeiten von unten, und tatsächlich aber dieses fragmentierte oder dieses nicht öffentlich-öffentliche oder öffentliche, nicht öffentliche. Und ich denke, das hat schon, oder da lohnt es sich, ich will jetzt nicht so weit ausholen, das hat schon sehr viel mit der neoliberalen, also der Begriff ist uns heute noch gar nicht gefallen, ist auch interessant, also dass man eher so auf etwas Handfestes, scheinbar Handfestes wie den Faschismus zurückgreift. Aber es hat sehr viel mit eben der, sag ich mal, neoliberalen Konterrevolution zu tun, die ja in diesen berühmten Aussagen gipfelte von Thatcher, there's no such thing as society. Also es gibt kein, Grunde genommen, überhalb der sich unternehmerisch betätigenden Individuen entstehenden gesellschaftlichen Ebene, auf der, sagen wir mal, allgemeine Ziele formuliert werden. Das ist zerstört worden, das sollte auch zerstört worden. Es ist natürlich auch aufs Engste verknüpft, tatsächlich mit Klassenkämpfen, mit verlorenen Klassenkämpfen. Ich denke, dass sozusagen das europäische Chile sprich der mit größtmöglicher Brutalität, also für ein europäisches Land, westeuropäisches Land mit größtmöglicher Brutalität niedergeschlagene Minenarbeiterstreik, da auch eine wichtige Rolle spielen. Und tatsächlich ist Facebook oder sind die anderen sozialen Netzwerke oder sozusagen die anderen freigegebenen Mikrofone und Speicherplätze tatsächlich das, was sich sozusagen rekonstituiert oder restrukturiert, nachdem eine natürlich bürgerliche Öffentlichkeit, die aber immerhin den Anspruch ja hatte, für alle da zu sein. Also man konnte das ja auch einfordern, wenn man ausgegrenzt war. Ne, das war doch mal das Ideal, nachdem das zerstört worden ist. Und das Ergebnis sind dann sozusagen diese Zwergformen von Gegenöffentlichkeit.
Und trotzdem, das soll jetzt vielleicht angeknüpft die letzte Frage sein. Diese Gegenöffentlichkeiten finde ich schon, das beschreibt Nagle in ihrem Buch auch, arbeiten mit einer bestimmten wirksamen Strategie des Vorpolitischen, wo wieder Laurie hat über sowas wie Gefühle oder eine bestimmte Form von irrationalen Momenten gesprochen, dass Nazis, wie Laurie sagen würde, tatsächlich häufig darauf plädieren, jeder soll seine freie Meinung äußern dürfen, Denkverbote werden angegriffen, allgemein soll zur Toleranz aufgerufen werden gegenüber Andersdenken, der sie selber sind. Trotzdem wird ja unter so einem Deckmantel oder unter dem Mantel von einer bestimmten Art von gefühlten Wahrheiten oder gefühlten Empfindungen, die endlich mal ausgedrückt werden dürfen und die raus müssen, tatsächlich dennoch zur Hetze gegen Ausländer aufgerufen, frauenfeindliche, schwulenfeindliche, antisemitische Äußerungen reihen sich und es gibt so eine Art Kultur der Morallosigkeit und des Tabubruchs, die sich so leichter etablieren lässt als ein politisches Vorfeld. Oder was ist das Gefährliche sozusagen auch an diesem Arbeiten mit Memes, mit Bildern, mit einer bestimmten Form des unausgesprochen, nicht argumentierenden, sondern gefühlten Recht haben?
I guess I'm not quite sure what the question was here, but I mean, if we're going to talk about the issue of freedom of speech, I think this is important because I've been on I don't know, actually, Angela, I don't know how you structure your research just in terms of time and scheduling into the alt-right. I find like I do it in blocks. So like I've recently been on another deep dive down like the 4chan and the Reddit rabbit hole and seeing what people are talking about after the events in Charlottesville and researching why it is that these people feel so oppressed. What is this oppression that they think that they are fighting? And almost the thing that comes up most often is freedom of speech, which is interesting because actually you have to work quite hard, particularly in the United States, to get anybody to tell you to shut up. The United States has, obviously, this is an interesting conversation again to be having in Germany, which has a much more rigorous attitude to there actually being some things you can't and shouldn't say in public. In the US, they kind of build this, they fetishize again their First Amendment whilst, obviating the actual truth, which is that it's never applied to everybody equally. There have always been things you can't say and speech acts you cannot perform in the US without serious backlash, including from the state. But these people, there's a certain amount of projection involved here. So the worst thing you can possibly be on the far right, or one of them, is a snowflake, oversensitive. But actually, these people are phenomenally sensitive to criticism, to the extent that they interpret any criticism or pushback towards these disgusting views as an attack on their freedom of speech, whilst at the same time showing no compunction before, organizing mobs to harass and drive women and people of color off the internet, or to try to do so just for expressing quite reasonable opinions about equality. It's I feel like there should be space within the discourse of free speech to actually make moral judgments outside the realm of the state. What free speech means and should mean, and as a journalist I believe this very strongly, is that the government should not be allowed to put you in jail, take your job away, or otherwise discriminate against or persecute you for speaking your mind. But the Tumblr liberals are not the government. Unless I've really got it wrong here, and there's some vast conspiracy of nerds going on. It's because I am not the government, so I am very free to. You are free to say that women aren't people and shouldn't be allowed the right to vote, and I am free to tell you that you're a dickhead and your mum would be ashamed of you. The idea that one of the reasons I believe that they're obsessed with this notion of free speech and the idea of they fetishize the idea of their own oppression because they have not actually experienced the kind of oppression that they almost want to claim, that they've not actually been, thrown out of a job selection pile because of the way their name sounds, or fired because they were going to get pregnant, or had to find, in his essay this week, Ta-Nehisi Coates saying, you've never been fired. You've never had to choose between the money to eat and the money to fund an abortion. These are not oppressions you have experienced. And this idea of free speech, this false valorization of a particular kind of freedom from criticism, is a way of dressing up the fact that all of these opinions are actually really reactionary and boring. They're dull. They're predictable. You know what they're going to say. And the idea that these ideas are actually transgressive and counterculture, I think we do need to push back on that a bit, because they take a countercultural format, yes, but actually what a lot of them are saying about immigrants, about women, those ideas were, at least until quite recently, very normal. Those ideas are still, ingrained into our culture. We still live in patriarchy. We still live in white supremacy. The idea that expressing racist and misogynist ideas is somehow transgressive is just cockeyed.
Okay, I will. The last word? Okay. Okay, so a lot of the free speech wars that have gone on, America has been, or the center of them, and but they haven't really been about relationship to the Constitution or something like that, because it isn't the state. The state isn't really playing any role at all in these things. So what is it then? I mean, what is a right to free speech if it doesn't include the state? If a person can be stopped from saying something, is that a taking away of the rights, of the right to free speech? I mean, the origin of rights, the idea of rights initially came from God. So. The way that we use them now has to do with the state. We've sort of, changed the meaning of them in that way. We think of rights as something that are given to us by the state. So if the state is not really playing a role here, what are we actually talking about? And to me, I think it's really an expression of much of Western society going through a period in which people's views are so divergent, or are simply cannot ever be reconciled, that this is ending up in these kind of battles and physical confrontations and so on, because it's not just a case of somebody saying something you disagree with or whatever. It's a case of people who absolutely loathe each other very intensely and want the other people locked up and stuff like that. So it is a question of in a way manners, in the sense that you cannot replace with the law what isn't already there. So, you can bring in a law, like if America changed its constitution and its approach to freedom of speech, I think all of this stuff would still remain exactly the same. Because it's about groups of people who disagree with each other so intensely that they can't even be in the same room together. And also that question of manners in the sense that political correctness itself is a type of manners. It's reformulating appropriate speech for a kind of pluralistic age. And these guys are trying to hit back against that, and they're trying to say, they understand that if we settle upon a system of manners, it's kind of over. Whoever gets to decide what that system is has sort of won the culture. And so that's why they have to keep breaking the taboos and being rude and trying to offend people as much as possible, because they don't want that settlement to kind of happen. They one of the things you were talking about, the pre-political, one of the things that they are, kind of very interested in is this idea of not being involved in formal politics, but instead staying on the margins and trying to move the Overton window, the Overton window being the window of acceptable thought. And so their idea is if we can just break the taboos, then the people in formal politics can say things they wouldn't have been able to say, and they can move further and further to the right, and it won't be taboo anymore. So that is kind of their goal. It's a cultural kind of mission, and it has to do with taboo breaking. And that is why it seems to be a war about free speech. I mean, we know the right doesn't actually want free speech. When they get into power, that's the first thing they get rid of. But that I think that's why it's essentially, we want to be able to break all the taboos because we know how powerful the taboos are. And that is really what's kind of going on.
Also vielleicht das sozusagen als Schlusswort von hier oben sozusagen, oder wichtiges Schlusswort. Wir würden jetzt versuchen, irgendwo gibt es ein Mikrofon, was rumgehen kann, und es gibt auch einen Menschen, der da dran sitzt und das irgendwie tut. Wenn ihr Fragen habt, Anmerkungen, ich sehe Hände. Bender, kannst du das sehen selber?
Ja, und ich glaube, wir hatten abgemacht, wir sammeln immer 2, 3 Fragen, weil ja sehr viele Leute da sind, damit wir möglichst viel noch schaffen. Einverstanden?
Ja.
Okay, dann fange ich hier an.
Should I stand or sit or? Okay. Hi, thank you all for this fantastic discussion. My question, I guess, is specifically targeted towards Angela, just because I read your book and this is kind of something that was going in my head. But anyone is, of course, free to answer it. You mentioned a lot the sense of the alt-right and the culture wars and such, focusing mostly on this counterculture movement. You bring into kind of the YouTube sphere, I guess, that you have kind of like these pseudo-intellectual persons, not like the Milos or Baked Alaska, whoever, but someone the sense of like Sargon of Akkad or something. And we see people like Ben Shapiro who appear on CNN who, argue with a libtard in order to, prove the point. Is there a sense that this movement could, kind of gain steam in an intellectual sense, or is it strictly only available in this very like meme-based culture? Like, could we see someone like, can't think of like a big conservative intellectual at the moment, but someone like how, Carl Schmitt was mentioned earlier, someone who's a big name who can be seen by the left and the right as like this intellectual, but who's so, stuck with the alt-right, who legitimizes the alt-right. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is also to Angela, and that's I think we have a mutual friend with this saying about the different platforms being specific to different ideologies, like podcasts are for socialists, and I'm wondering like what your thought is to the answer to that. Like, is there anything to that? Is there something substantial in 4chan that made it so amiable to like this kind of far right? And is there something in Tumblr that made it like this sort of liberal identity politics zone?
Okay, and one last for the first round.
How has 4chan or the alt-right responded to either of your works, if they have?
This was short and simple. Thanks.
I've avoided looking at how 4chan has responded, but the only initial comments that I saw were kind of amusing. Actually, they weren't anything too awful. They were calling me sort of like their stalker and stuff like that. On the question of are the platforms sort of, why are the platforms creating those styles of politics? I only have a vague sense of this for some of them. Like in the case of YouTube, I mean, they often set up their show in the style of that kind of Fox News yelling at the camera, you know, just one person with a background sort of, you know, speaking directly to camera. Like they are mimicking that sort of style, aren't they? So maybe that has something to do with that. I can't really imagine anyone I know on the left just sitting in front of a camera, sort of shouting at the camera with a map in the background or whatever. In the case of 4chan, I think it created that kind of politics because, first of all, it was always about anonymity and the idea that you can say the unsayable when you're anonymous. So it was always kind of inherently about taboo breaking. It was also kind of rooted in anime fan culture, so they've kept that bit as well. And I think it always had a culture of cruelty. You know, they always love to swarm people and sort of do incredibly mean, cruel things to people. That's why nobody would really write very critically about them for a long time, because it was very scary to do so. They would, you know, sort of terrorize people. And on the last one, which is like sort of, do I see any intellectuals emerging from this? I think the only one is Richard Spencer. I think he's the only kind of one of the younger set, we'll say. I mean, there are some older guys like Jared Taylor and people like that who, you know, are not really alt-right. I mean, they've been around for ages. They're just sort of far-right who are probably happy to see there are suddenly all these young people watching their videos. But of that sort of relatively younger set who are recognizably alt-right, I would say Richard Spencer is the one who tends to come out of interviews pretty unscathed, actually, because he gets really soft questions, but also because, you know, he's had a lot of time to work these out, and he knows how to, and I suppose because he's coming from this embattled sort of fringe, or what has been an embattled fringe for so long, you know, he has had to come up with an answer for every question. I think if you're in that sort of, certainly if you're in sort of relatively mainstream liberal world, you probably haven't ever had your views challenged that much. And so he can just pick these people off really easily. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I think all these Sargon of Akkad people are just like IT guys, and they're, you know, nothing wrong with IT guys, but like, you know, they're just not very. I don't see them writing great books or doing anything sort of like that.
Ganz kurz, weil schon ein paar gehen. Wir haben auf alle so eure Plätze so einen Zettel gelegt. Könnt ihr den ausfüllen und abgeben. Aber jetzt möchte noch Felix gerne Angel eine Frage stellen.
Was ist mit Steve Bannon? Also was ist mit, also es war ja die Frage nach intellektuellen Führungsfiguren oder nach Leuten, die ein bisschen mehr zu sagen haben oder die sozusagen was auch zusammen oder fassen oder katalysieren können. Was ist mit Steve Bannon? in diesem Reigen. Wie würdest du ihn einschätzen?
Yeah, I suppose I don't. Again, I would kind of put Steve Bannon in a slightly different category. He's, but I can definitely see that he's part of that, Trumpian anti-establishment right. Yeah, he will actually. I didn't even think of him. He will be a significant figure because now that he doesn't have to perform any of the niceties to the extent that there were any kind of, of being informal politics, it means that he can go back into that alternative media world, which has now grown to such a huge extent. He has a huge platform, and he can bring certainly a bit more weight and something more serious to it. I mean, he may even, because Trump has fired all these kind of anti-establishment right people, it may be that the alt-right starts to really turn on Trump, and in which case the people who he fired, Bannon and people like that, can reinvent themselves as the authentic sort of Trumpian anti-establishment people. Because, Bannon in interviews, he's not a very good advertisement for the Irish complexion, but but he clearly is smart. He's read a lot, and there's a certain weight to what he says. He does talk about the big questions. He kind of jumps ahead of the small stuff and goes straight to civilizational decline and these things.
I mean, I guess I could answer the question about how 4chan and all these people have responded to my work, which is with 7 years of relentless harassment and death threats on my end anyway, which is partly because I guess more of the stuff I've done is explicitly identified as feminist. That's the thing that seems to upset them most. They also get upset because the internet found out I was kind of Jewish, and that is also like people on the internet have started calling me a Jewess, which is a really kind of Victorian anti-Semitic term in English. It's but yeah, it's not been fun, and I think it's a really common thing for people who criticize or in any way even discuss, like you said, these people and their subcultures in a negative way to face an extraordinary amount of harassment and targeted abuse, and for every person who is still standing and still out there doing that work, there are other people who have retreated, and there are other people who have just never got into that position in the first place and decided that and looked at what happens to somebody like me, somebody like Anita Sarkeesian, and said, well, no, that's a bit too much. I don't want to do that. And that's what it is. It's an attempt to terrorize people out of whatever these public spaces are. Which is why I'm not I think we do down the idea of safe spaces, which is kind of what Tumblr has become in a way. It's just a space for the fluffy people to be a bit nicer to each other, and I think there is still value in that. Even if we're apparently still in a political culture that valorizes bullies more than ever and has elected a bully in chief on a platform of bullying. So.
Okay, noch eine zweite Runde mit 2, 3 Fragen? Okay, meldet euch, wer...
Hier ganz vorn sehe ich euch.
Ja, ich komme dann rum. Bitte haltet das Mikro möglichst nah, sonst müssen wir es tierisch aufdrehen.
Ja, ich werde die Frage auf Deutsch stellen. I'll ask the question in English, in German, sorry. Just to say that, I don't know if Angela has the... okay, gut. Ich hab hier eine Diskussion über die Linke selbst vermisst. Also die eine Frage war aufgekommen, ob sich die Linke zu sehr um die Minderheiten gekümmert hat. Es ist aber also meines Erachtens zu kurz gekommen, was die eigene Kritik von Linken an sich selbst ist. Es gab nämlich jetzt auch im Zuge der Wahl von Trump einige Linke, die sich kritisiert haben, dass sie eben in so einem Jargon, in einer Blase eigentlich sich verhalten, die für wenige Leute erreichbar ist. Und da frage ich mich, was, oder überhaupt, kann man eigentlich von links sprechen, ohne sich zu fragen, was bedeutet das? Muss man nicht immer weiter daran arbeiten, an den Errungenschaften von Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht und anderen, ohne sich mit Zitaten eigentlich selbst zu überhöhen? Das ist irgendwie das, was mich ziemlich gestört hat bei Zeiten hier in der Diskussion, nicht immer. Also als es im Fluss war, fand ich es sehr schön. Aber eben die eigene Kritik und die ein bisschen tiefer reingeht, als sich nur die Minoritäten von außen anzuschauen, das habe ich vermisst. Und da wollte ich Laurie Penny fragen, als hier gerufen wurde, der Kapitalismus trägt die Verantwortung dafür, dass die Gesellschaften sich spalten. Da wollte ich fragen, ob ich richtig verstanden habe, dass da der Einwand kam, man kann nicht den Kapitalismus für alles verantworten. Also Kapitalismus heißt auch Rassismus, sich damit zu befassen. Und das ist anscheinend, dass die Geschichte oder die Lektüre der Geschichte verkannt wird, wenn man nicht im Einzelnen sich mit diesen Begriffen oder mit diesen Ausgrenzungen befasst. Aber ja, genau, ich fasse es jetzt nochmal nur kurz zum Schluss. Aber das eben habe ich hier vermisst, dass gerade Rassismus nicht gekoppelt oder entkoppelt von Kapitalismus ist, wenn man an den Ursprung geht. Und ob heute eben gerade die Linke immer noch dieses Privilegium hat, was damals auch der Grund war, warum andere Völker kolonisiert wurden, genau, ob sie sich damit nicht befassen möchte.
Okay, hier vorne, wer hatte sich gemeldet? Okay, keep it short and simple.
Yeah, actually, it's more kind of addition because I was working for 10 years in the IT field and I dislike any kind of discrimination. So also, you know, of course, our job is doing a lot to you. So you're confronted with a lot of attitudes and you adapt a lot. But it's just human, and every human has a left side, a middle side, and a right wing. So it depends on our conditions, what we show and what we develop and what we are aware of ourselves. So what I'm missing is a kind of inner side at every person, also political and also at this grouping, because this grouping can only depend on an own recognition, what you desire or anything what you feel you're liking. So when you say that they have problems, it's usually also a problem inside. So yeah, that's what I'm missing this discussion, because a political statement is always something which is out of your own psyche and your own cultivation, socialization, and this is something we all go through, and we do not know what someone has experienced. So yeah, that's my.
Hi. So you said in the beginning that the internet is simply a tool, a medium, and you said that we shouldn't start the discussion with Twitter, and you then came in at the end about there existing a rabbit hole due to customization, customer algorithms. And these three things, I think I want to try and bring them together and ask for your opinions on, given our human nature to be addicted or to become addicted to things and the instant gratification, the nature of the internet. If it is just a tool, then tools are also regulated. Guns are just a tool, and they are regulated. So do you see any place for regulation of the internet?
Thank you. I don't know why I'm putting this back. I need this. Thanks. To the first speaker first. Well, you're absolutely right. I think what I was trying to say in the first place was that we far too easily decouple racism from capitalism. There is this idea particularly on the self-flagellating center liberal left, that we've focused too much on these side issues of racism and sexism where actually is exactly like you say. I think it's massively important to understand that we cannot adequately address the iniquities of capital unless we also, and as a central point of our movement, address racism, address globalism, address how labor is divided between different gender categories. I think it's absolutely critical for anti-capitalism to be intersectional. I'm trying to push this argument throughout most of my writing at the moment, basically, but also, it's in the latest book. It's this idea that, identity politics has to be central, as we understand it. These kind of identity politics are not side issues. They have to be central to any anti-capitalist, pro-worker formulation. There's been far too much. The left certainly needs to do a lot of self-critique, but it seemed that particularly after these recent elections, the self-critique has been entirely in the wrong direction. The second question was about, I believe, about like centering emotion and centering this kind of inner life of individuals in terms of when we talk about politics. I think, that's true, but we also... Again, what we were saying right at the start is this distinction that people make between facts and feelings, and this distinction people make between this idea of sober, rational policy discussion and irrational feelings, when in fact so much of politics and the politics we gravitate to are dictated by the world of emotion and feeling. And I guess that's one of the reasons that in my own work with the far right, I've been looking at kind of the irrational emotional basis for the formation of those movements, and I'll let the other speakers address the last question more. But I think you talk about the internet filter bubbles and maybe the internet just being a tool, but on the other hand, different platforms, different kinds of political movements gravitating to different platforms. I think there's a really important quotation, and I'm going to completely mess up the name of the guy, so you can just Google it, but the quotation is, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. Nothing is ever just a tool. I wasn't trying to suggest that because the internet is a tool, there's anything small or unimportant about that, but tools can, when it comes to regulation and censorship, I think the difficulty is you always have to imagine how the tools and regulations you put in place might be misused by bad actors and by governments you might not necessarily disagree with. You might not necessarily agree with, and what people are finding right now is the architecture of surveillance and of individual state harassment that was put into place a great deal under the two Obama presidencies, and people were a bit more relaxed about it because the Democrats were in power. Well, now the Republicans are in power, and suddenly people are realizing how dangerous those tools were in the hands of the state. So, I don't believe there are many problems, certainly not of the ones we've discussed on this panel, to which more state regulation of online spaces is the answer. That's it. Thanks. Now the techies have identified themselves. Thanks. Hi, guys.
I'm going to actually go backwards just because the last one is the one I have kind of closest to mind. On the regulation of the internet, I mean, one way I think it certainly does have to be regulated is the fact that, Google is probably the biggest monopoly that's ever existed in human history, and it has a monopoly that would never be allowed in any other area of the economy. And it's, a monopoly that is quite kind of scary at this point. I would say that is an area that, that might need to be regulated. I don't know how exactly. I mean, that would be way beyond what I would be able to argue for, but that seems certainly to be a much scarier part of the internet than necessarily the nasty things said by people using it. I also think, kind of like the point I was making about, the state cannot replace the sort of moral failings in a way of that are already there. I mean, you know, the reason that it's going to be very hard to argue against censorship of online material is because people sort of can't behave with sort of even a basic level of sort of humanity on a lot of platforms, you know, and it makes it extremely hard to then have to make the case for that speech being allowed or whatever, and that's probably going to be the case. You know, that sort of the fact that there is that ugliness in the culture is probably going to still be there, regardless of whether it's regulated in that way or not. About the personal experience stuff, I mean, I wasn't quite clear on whether you were talking about what, like, our own personal experience or that of the kind of stuff that we're studying, the alt-right and stuff like that. Sorry? Okay, yeah, I mean, and actually in a way this is about also the taboos and the offensive speech questions and all this stuff, because, you know, I think that in correctly identifying the sort of hypocrisy of the free speech right or whatever, or pointing out that they're not genuinely concerned with freedom of speech, we miss a conversation that also needs to happen, which is that, you know, I think there is a problem with the fact that people on the left are not allowed to develop and change their minds politically and get something wrong once in a while, you know, like, I don't know, there can't be any other sort of movement where it's so hard to recover from accidentally getting something wrong, or, you know, when you're even a teenager. And now, of course, the online world, if you're recording yourself or blogging everything, you know, it's very hard to, for a person to develop in that way politically, certainly much harder than it would have been in the past when there wasn't a record of that. So, I mean, there are all those kind of, those personal questions, and people are aware that they're being watched, so that influences what you say, and everyone is afraid of the mob on their own side attacking them as well, and that is having an influence on what people are willing to say, and how they express themselves. And then on the first question, I think that what you say is absolutely right, and you know, and understanding those questions as questions of capitalism and questions that are sort of economic in nature. So in other words, there isn't that dichotomy there. I wonder sometimes if the constant creation of dichotomies between these things on the left, which, I mean, I've done myself, is actually to do with maybe factional fighting within the left, where people are actually talking about something else. Like, say, for example, a lot of these kind of the dichotomies that have been created have come from the American context in a lot of in some of the stuff that we're talking about. And I think even when I look at kind of discussion that goes on online, particularly on something like Twitter, it seems like people choose a side, people choose a sort of gang to be in, and then they just sort of lob insults at the other side. And in many cases, if you think of something, for example, like when Bernie Sanders said of Hillary Clinton, it's not good enough just to be a woman, then the Sanders sort of fans or whatever were saying, oh, great, you know, he sort of insulted the identity politics people. Then the identity politics people called the Bernie fans brocialists, and it sort of goes on like that. And so it kind of becomes real just through this totally stupid nonsense conversation. We start to accept that it's a real thing, and you actually end up framing your own thinking in that way, because that is the frame that's sort of constantly there. And it becomes real after a while, because if everyone is thinking in those terms, very simplistic terms where there's kind of liberalism and identity on one side and sort of materialism on the other. Yeah, I mean, I agree that that's a thing that needs to be talked about in a less sort of simplistic way. Yeah.
Was sagt die Uhr? Okay, die Uhr sagt, es ist viel zu spät. Ich möchte euch nochmal bitte auf diese weißen Zettel hinweisen und sie euch bitten auszufüllen. Einfach vorne da, wo man auch die hier abgibt, einfach da. Und was uns beim Aufräumen nachher die Arbeit total erleichtert, ist, wenn ihr jeweils die Bank, auf der ihr sitzt, umdreht und zusammenklappt. Aber bevor ihr das macht, möchte ich gerne, dass ihr euch bei unseren 3 eingeladenen Gästen bedankt, denn es war eine super Diskussion. Und natürlich auch und natürlich nochmal bei den beiden, die übersetzen.